Today on Inside Utah Politics, counting our veterans. A Utah advocate is pushing for a question on the upcoming census, why he says it's crucial to the cause of caring for those who serve our country. And problems with the parties. Both the major parties in Utah are facing issues from within. Are average Utahns losing interest, and what's the role moving forward? Our panel debates.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Good Sunday morning, and thanks so much for joining us for Inside Utah Politics. I'm Glenn Mills. We begin this morning with Terry Scow. He's a retired director of the Utah Department of Veterans Affairs. Terry, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Let's get right into it. You're pushing for something on the census. What is that?
Well, I want a veterans question on this census, Glenn. After 2000, they stopped having the veterans question on this census. They had it on since the 1800s, and then for some reason they took that question off and they rely on what they now call America's Community Survey, which is a small sampling, and it is nowhere near as accurate as a hard count census question.
So in your view, what's the problem with that?
Well, the problem with it causes an undercount. We got funds when I was with the Veterans Office to develop a veterans database, and according to our numbers, there's about 175,000 veterans in the state of Utah. But the data that America's Community Survey produces, that Census relies on, says there's about 125,000 veterans. That 50,000 miscount means that we don't get any more nursing home beds. Every nursing home in the state is full. Every one of them has about a year waiting list. If we were to get this count increased by having the census add that question, then we would get more allocation of nursing home beds, and the VA pays about half the cost of care for veterans in veterans homes, so it's a big deal.
That's just one issue when we're talking about services, though. What other things could potentially suffer?
Well, it affects funding for a number of other things in terms of how many community-based outpatient clinics you get and those kind of things. So the census is the formula that's utilized across the spectrum, particularly the VA, for counting veterans, approving funds for veteran programs, construction dollars, those kind of things.
And talk about how much those impact our veterans.
Well, they affect them a lot because, as I said, the VA pays about $2,000 a month for a veteran who does not receive a VA disability for their care in a veterans home. If you're 70% disabled or higher, they pay 100%. If you're in for service connected disability, they pay all. So we need more nursing home beds. Salt Lake's a good example. Salt Lake Veterans Home's 81 beds. It should be 150, and that hurts veterans in the Salt Lake Valley because there's 65,000 veterans in Salt Lake County, and unfortunately that was the size of the piece of ground the VA gave us, and so we can increase all of those. But the formula they use now, we cannot get any more nursing home beds or allocation for nursing home payments.
You and I have talked about extending those services up into Ogden and other parts of the state. How are those efforts coming, and how could that potentially be impacted by this? Well,
there's a veterans home in Ogden, 120 beds. There's one in Payson, 108. There's one in Ivins, 108, and then the 81 in Salt Lake City. We now have a vet center in North Ogden. You and I have talked about this a while back, and Congressman Rob Bishop actually got legislation to have that veterans home named after Major Brent Taylor. So that vet center, which does mental health counseling for combat veterans, is now open. So you have one in Salt Lake, one in North Ogden, one in Provo, and one in St. George. So unfortunately, Utah is below the national average in the percentage of veterans enrolled in VA health care. We're below the national average percentage of veterans who are receiving VA disability for service-connected disabilities, and so there's a number of factors, and you know, it's always getting the word out, letting veterans know that the services are there, and then having them apply.
And mental health has been such an issue we've focused on lately because, unfortunately, many of our veterans are committing suicide. So that's a crucial point in that when we talk about mental health as well.
That's true. Vet centers were formulated in the 70s for Vietnam veterans, and they provide mental health counseling for combat veterans. They do military sexual trauma. So more vet centers would obviously be helpful because that's the first line of defense. The VA is really the world recognized experts in post-traumatic polytrauma, number of things. And so more vet centers, and as you know, about 22 veterans a day are dying from suicide, and you know, that's 22 too many.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Let's talk about the status. So you're pushing for this question to be put on the census. What action have you taken?
Well, I've been to hell and back twice, to be honest with you.
I've seen you do that for other things for our veterans as well.
Well, I am persistent. There's no question about that. This started back in 2000. I took over as the director of the State Veterans Office in 2001, and when I realized that Utah had one of the largest miscounts of any state in the country, I started looking at that, pursuing it, and 2010 census came and went. And then when I found out that they were not considering putting a question on the 2020 census, I got the American Legion, which I'm a representative for. I'm on the National Executive Committee. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the state directors, all of those organizations passed resolutions urging the Congress to mandate that the census include a question, are you a veteran, on their heart count census. Governor Huntsman helped me work on it. Senator Hatch wrote a letter to the president just before he left. The thing I worry about, though, is I think that letter ended up getting to a low-level staffer there in the White House, because they have hundreds of staffers there.
But you've had Representative Bishop take it up
Rob
recently.
Bishop is the latest to carry the mantle this year, and actually wrote a letter to the census director. And Congressman Bishop is on the Armed Services Committee, and that obviously carries.
So any idea of when we might hear back from that?
Well, I would have loved to have heard something by now, but you know, a lot of this stuff ends up being pressure points.
Sure.
Hopefully, if this program and some of the news articles that we've done later gets the eye, gets the attention of some of these folks, and someone will say to the Commerce has oversight over the census. And if they say to the guy, I want that question on there, they've had a lot of uproar over, are you a citizen question?
Right.
And that's really not our issue. Are you a veteran? Doesn't matter what your race is, don't matter what your sex is. Are you a veteran? We want that counted, so it's an equity issue.
All right, we will continue to keep an eye on that. Real quick, I have a couple seconds left, but a big anniversary for the American Legion.
That's true. The American Legion was founded in 1919. This is the 100th anniversary of the American Legion. And on behalf of the Utah American Legion, I want to present you with a coin commemorating our 100th anniversary. And
I appreciate that and all that you do for our veterans. Thanks so much for being here on this Sunday morning. Appreciate it.
It's my honor. It's noble work.
Coming up, the U.S. Attorney General hits the hot seat over the Mueller report on Capitol Hill. Our panel will weigh in on the very latest with that. But first, baking up a new beginning, how a local bakery is helping former addicts and inmates make the most of a second chance.